Little girl pointed back, crying they locked her in there. The biker turned without a word. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The wind howled as Jake, Reaper, Morrison revved his Harley-Davidson, the engine rumbling like thunder across the quiet stretch of road. He had been riding for hours, the cold air biting at his leather jacket, his mind lost in the hum of the tires on the asphalt. Jake had seen it all. The back alleys, the rough neighborhoods, the violence, and the wreckage of a life spent on the edge. He didn't mind the solitude. It was his comfort. But that night, something changed. As he rounded a corner, he saw her, standing at the edge of the road, a small figure in the darkness. Her face was streaked with tears, her clothes tattered, and her eyes wide with fear. She pointed back toward an old, abandoned house, crying, "They locked her in there." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had seen desperation before, but something about this girl made his instincts scream. Without a second thought, he slammed on the brakes, sending gravel skidding beneath the tires, and dismounted from his bike. The girl's voice echoed in the still night air, filled with terror. Jake took a step forward, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. "Who locked her in there?" he asked, his voice rough from years of shouting over the roar of motorcycles. The girl was shaking, her small hands clutching her chest as she glanced toward the old house. "Please, you have to help her," she begged. "They locked her inside. I don't know who they are, but she's in there. She's scared, and she needs help." Jake didn't hesitate. The girl's plea rang in his ears like a bell, and his protective instincts, buried deep beneath years of hard living, flared to life. He turned toward the house, the crumbling structure looming ahead. It looked abandoned, its windows boarded up, the paint peeling like skin from an old wound. The air felt thick with tension, and every muscle in Jake's body went on high alert. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he wasn't about to leave someone in danger. He pushed the heavy door open with a force that made it creak loudly on its hinges. The smell of damp wood and decay hit him immediately. Inside, it was dark, the only light coming from the cracked windows. The silence was suffocating. As he stepped further into the house, he could hear the faint sound of someone crying. His heart raced. "Stay close," Jake told the girl, motioning for her to follow him. He moved cautiously through the house, his boots thudding softly on the floorboards as he searched for any sign of the person the girl had mentioned. The sound of crying grew louder, coming from behind a closed door at the end of a narrow hallway. Jake's hand rested on the door handle, his mind running through all the worst-case scenarios. He took a deep breath and turned the knob. The door creaked open to reveal a small, dark room. In the corner, huddled on the floor, was a woman. Her face was pale, her clothes torn, and she looked up at Jake with wide, fearful eyes. She gasped when she saw him, her hands shaking as she backed away. "Please, don't hurt me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake's heart twisted. The woman's fear was palpable, and he realized she had been locked away for far too long. Without saying a word, he stepped into the room and reached out a hand to her. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. "I'm here to help you. I am not here to hurt you. I'm here to help you," Jake said, his voice steady as he reached out a hand to the trembling woman in the corner. The room was small, the only light coming from the faint glow of a street lamp filtering through a crack in the boarded-up window. She stared at him for a moment, her wide eyes full of fear, but something in his voice seemed to calm her. Slowly, she lowered her hands from her chest, her breathing shallow as she looked up at him. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking, "they locked me in here. I don't know who they are, but they won't let me go." Jake's heart clenched. He could see the terror in her eyes, the pain in her voice, and he knew he had to get her out of there, no matter what it took. "You're safe now," Jake said, his words firm but gentle. "I'm going to get you out of here." The woman looked up at him again, as if searching for something, before she finally spoke. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Jake paused for a moment. He didn't have a good answer, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't about to leave her behind. "I don't need to know you," Jake replied. "I just know you need help. and I'm here to give it. He took another step toward her, gently offering his hand. After a long moment of hesitation, she slowly took it, and he helped her to her feet. Her body felt fragile in his arms, but she didn't protest. She looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief, like she couldn't quite understand that someone, anyone, would care enough to help her. "My name's Sarah," she said quietly as Jake helped her toward the door. "Sarah-chun." "I'm Jake," he said simply, guiding her out of the room and toward the front door. As they stepped outside, the cold air hit them like a wave. The wind was bitter, and the streets were eerily silent, but Jake knew they didn't have much time. He needed to get her to safety before whoever had locked her in that room came back. They walked quickly, the sound of their footsteps muffled in the cold night. The girl, the one who had called for help earlier, was nowhere to be seen, but Jake didn't have time to look for her now. His focus was on getting Sarah out of danger. He led her down the street to his Harley, the familiar rumble of the engine reassuring him. "You're going to be okay," he said, more to himself than to her as he helped Sarah onto the back of the bike. She seemed too weak to protest, her hands trembling as she clutched the back of his jacket. Jake climbed on and started the engine, the roar of the bike filling the quiet night. He looked over his shoulder to make sure Sarah was holding on. "Hang on tight," he said. They sped off into the night, the wind whipping past them, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He had learned long ago to trust his instincts, and right now, they were screaming at him. He needed to get out of this area fast. As they turned onto a side street, Jake glanced in the rearview mirror. Sure enough, there was a dark sedan trailing behind them, keeping a steady distance. He didn't know who was in the car, but he wasn't about to take any chances. He gunned the engine, the bike roaring louder as they sped down the road. The sedan followed, but it wasn't gaining on them. Jake's eyes flicked to the side as they turned a corner, weaving through the dark streets. His mind was racing. Whoever was behind them wasn't going to give up that easily. But Jake wasn't about to stop now. He had a woman to protect, and nothing would make him falter. They had to get out of there. They had to get somewhere safe. As they raced through the night, Jake's thoughts were interrupted by a flash of headlights behind them. The sedan had pulled up close now, its headlights blinding. "Hold on," Jake shouted over the roar of the engine as he swerved to avoid a pothole. The sedan wasn't backing off. Whoever was in that car wasn't going to let them go without a fight. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, but he couldn't afford to panic. He had to think fast. He took another sharp turn, pushing the bike to its limits, praying that the sedan would be forced to back off. For a moment, it seemed like the car was losing ground. But then, the sound of screeching tires filled the air, and Jake knew the chase wasn't over. He glanced behind him once more. The car was still there, closing in. Jake's mind was racing. He needed a plan. He needed to get them to safety. He had to do something, and fast. The next turn would be their last chance. He could feel the tension building in the air, the pressure mounting with every second. He gripped the handlebars tighter, his knuckles white from the strain. The next few seconds would decide everything. "I am not slowing down," Jake muttered to himself as he gripped the handlebars tighter, his heart pounding in his chest. The wind howled around him, and the roar of the Harley-Davidson's engine filled the night. Behind him, the sedan was closing in, its headlights blinding in the rearview mirror. Jake's instincts screamed at him to push harder, faster, but he couldn't help but glance over his shoulder. Sarah, clutching tightly to his back, looked pale with fear, her face buried against his jacket as she tried to steady herself. He could feel her trembling against him, and that made him even more determined to get them both out of there. They were being followed, and they were running out of time. The streets were narrow, winding through the quiet suburban area like a maze, but Jake knew them well. He'd spent enough time on these roads, riding with his brothers, and tonight he was using all that experience to shake off whoever was trailing them. The sedan wasn't far behind. The tires screeched as it took the same sharp corner Jake had just rounded, but it wasn't gaining on them yet. Jake's mind raced. He needed to find a way to lose them, fast. He spotted an alley up ahead, barely wide enough for the bike to fit through, but it was a chance. It had to be. He revved the engine and swung the bike toward the alley, the tires skidding on the wet road as they slid into the narrow passage. The walls of the buildings on either side seemed to close in as they sped through the alley, the only sound the steady thrum of the bike and the rush of the wind. Jake could feel the adrenaline surging, but his focus never wavered. He glanced behind him, but the sedan wasn't there. For a moment, he thought they'd lost them, but then he heard the screech of tires behind him. The sedan had followed them into the alley. There was no time to lose. He had to act fast. Ahead of him, the alley split into two directions. One path was a dead end, the other led to an open street. He had only a split second to decide, but his instincts took over. Jake veered to the right, narrowly avoiding a dumpster as he sped toward the exit. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the sedan's headlights reflect off the alley walls, still. Behind them, gaining ground. They weren't going to stop. They were closing in fast. Without thinking, Jake pushed the throttle all the way down, the bike roaring as it shot forward. The alley opened up into a wide street, but it was dark and deserted. Jake knew that he had no time to waste. He needed to get Sarah to safety. He glanced back just once, seeing the sedan in the distance, but this time it wasn't as close. They were still in pursuit, but not as quickly. It gave him a glimmer of hope, just enough to push forward. The road ahead was clear, and Jake floored the accelerator, the Harley screeching as it surged forward. He could hear the engine of the sedan behind them, but for now, they were gaining distance. The bright streetlights on the next block were a welcome sight, and for a moment, it looked like they might make it. But just as Jake started to feel a sense of relief, his rearview mirror lit up with the glare of headlights once again. The sedan was back on their tail. It was relentless, determined. They weren't going to stop. Jake's mind raced. He needed to outsmart them, outmaneuver them. Ahead, he saw a row of parked cars and a small, unlit side street. His gut told him to take it. It was a risk, but he had no choice. He made a sharp left turn, swerving past the parked cars as the Harley's tires screeched in protest. Sarah gasped, clutching him tighter, but Jake didn't slow down. He glanced over his shoulder and saw the sedan's headlights flare, following them into the side street. They were too close now. He was almost out of options. Just as he prepared to push the bike to its limit, a flashing red light appeared up ahead. A police car. He didn't know if the officers inside would be able to help, but it was the first sign of hope he'd seen in miles. The sedan was still behind them, but now, it had to make a choice. The police car was blocking their path. Jake's mind raced as he made a split-second decision. He turned sharply, aiming for an alley to the left, just as the sedan came up behind them. The police car slowed, its lights flashing, but Jake didn't stop. He heard the screech of tires as the sedan followed them, but now, they were stuck in traffic. The police car had created enough of an obstacle to slow them down. Jake and Sarah took the opportunity to disappear into the night, the sounds of sirens and car horns echoing behind them as they sped away. For now, they were free. But Jake knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The threat was still out there, and it wasn't going away anytime soon. I'm not stopping now, Jake thought to himself, pushing the throttle forward with all his might. The Harley's engine roared as he sped down the street, the wind biting into his face, and Sarah's grip tightening on his jacket. The police car had created just enough distance between them and the sedan, but Jake knew it wouldn't last long. They were still being hunted. He glanced behind him once more, only to see the flashing red and blue lights of the police car fading into the distance. But the sedan was still there, just out of sight. The danger wasn't over, not by a long shot. His heart raced as his mind worked to come up with a plan. The streets were dark, empty, and the city around them seemed to be holding its breath. He needed to find somewhere to hide, somewhere the sedan couldn't follow. Up ahead, Jake saw a narrow street to the left. It was barely lit, and the entrance was flanked by a couple of abandoned buildings. It was the perfect spot to shake off the pursuit. Without hesitation, he swerved the bike onto the side street, the tires screeching as they made the sharp turn. The alley was narrow, and Jake had to weave around piles of debris and broken trash cans. He could hear the engine of the sedan behind them, but it wasn't close enough to make out the exact distance. He had to keep moving. Sarah, still holding onto him tightly, looked over his shoulder, her face pale with fear. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice shaking. Jake didn't answer right away. His mind was too focused on the road ahead. He knew that he couldn't keep running forever. At some point, he'd have to confront whatever was chasing them. But for now, he just needed to get her to safety. He glanced down at his GPS. A warehouse. District was a few blocks away, tucked behind a series of industrial buildings. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best chance he had. He twisted the throttle again, and the bike surged forward, the alley opening up into a wider street. He darted through the intersection, cutting across lanes of traffic, trying to lose the sedan in the maze of buildings. The sound of tires screeching echoed behind them as the sedan followed closely. Jake's grip on the handlebars tightened. He wasn't going to stop now. He could see the warehouse district in the distance, the hulking shadows of the buildings rising up against the sky. There was no turning back now. The alleyways and tight corners were behind them. He needed to act quickly. He took another sharp turn, heading down a side road that led into a dead end. It was a gamble, but if the sedan followed, they'd be stuck. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. He could hear the sedan's engine behind them, the distance growing smaller with every passing second. He slammed the brakes, sending the bike screeching to a halt just before the dead-end wall. For a split second, he thought they were done. But then, just as he expected, the sedan barreled down the road behind them. The headlights illuminated the alley in front of them, but it was too late for them to stop. The sedan tried to brake, but it skidded on the slick pavement. It crashed into the side of the dead-end wall with a violent crunch. Jake knew they had just bought themselves a few more precious moments. He didn't wait to see what happened next. He grabbed Sarah's hand and yanked her off the bike, pulling her toward a nearby loading dock. "Come on," he yelled, pushing her forward as fast as he could. They ran, their footsteps echoing off the brick walls of the buildings as the sound of the crash faded behind them. They reached a small door at the back of one of the warehouses and banged on it frantically. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing a man in his 50s, his face lined with age and hard work. He looked at Jake and Sarah with a mix of confusion and suspicion. "What's going on?" the man asked. "You need to hide us," Jake said, his voice low and urgent. The man hesitated for a moment, but then he stepped aside, allowing them to slip inside. Once the door was shut behind them, the man led them into the heart of the warehouse, where a maze of crates and machinery stretched out before them. Jake could hear the muffled sound of the sedan's engine as it slowly came to a stop outside, but they were hidden, for now. The man led them to a small storage room at the back. "Stay here," he said, his voice gruff. "Don't make a sound." Jake nodded, his mind still racing as he looked at Sarah. She was pale, shaken, but she was alive. And that was all that mattered for now. The man left them alone in the room, locking the door behind him. Jake leaned against the wall, his eyes fixed on the door as the minutes stretched on. His mind kept replaying everything that had happened. He knew they couldn't stay here forever. The threat wasn't gone. It was just waiting for them to make a move. And they needed a plan. Jake's heart was still pounding in his chest as he turned to Sarah, who was sitting quietly in the corner, her eyes wide with fear. He could feel the weight of the night pressing down on him. But he wasn't going to let that stop him. He had to protect her. He had to make sure they got out of this alive. "I'm not staying here any longer," Jake thought to himself as he paced back and forth in the dimly lit storage room. The door was locked, but it didn't feel like enough. The fear of being trapped, cornered, was rising again. The sound of sirens and the distant roar of engines only seemed to amplify the tension in the air. He could feel the weight of every second that passed. "We can't stay hidden forever," he murmured, glancing at Sarah. She was sitting against the wall, her eyes wide with a mix of exhaustion and anxiety. Her face had gone pale, but she wasn't saying much. She wasn't crying anymore, just silently watching him, as if waiting for him to make the next move. "We're going to get through this," Jake said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. The room felt like it was closing in, and the walls seemed to echo with the weight of their predicament. Sarah hadn't said much, but the haunted look in her eyes was enough. She'd been through something far worse than anyone should have to endure. And now, it was his job to protect her. But how? What was he supposed to do? The old man who had let them in, the one who seemed like he'd seen more than his fair share of trouble, had locked them in this room and promised to keep them safe. But Jake knew better than to trust anyone completely. The world was full of people with their own agendas, and in his line of work, trust was earned, not given freely. After what felt like hours, the door to the storage room opened with a creak. Jake tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward the knife he kept hidden in his jacket. But it was just the old man, his face serious, his eyes scanning the room like he was expecting trouble. "You need to get moving," the man said, his voice low. "They're coming. I can hear their cars outside. If you stay here much longer, they'll find you. And they won't stop until they do." Jake didn't need to be told twice. His mind snapped into action. He turned to Sarah, who had risen to her feet, her eyes wide with fear. "Come on, we're leaving," Jake said, his voice steady, despite the panic threatening to break through. He knew they didn't have much time. They needed to get out, and fast. The man motioned for them to follow him, leading them through the maze of crates and boxes in the warehouse. The air was thick with dust, the smell of oil and metal mingling with the faint scent of decay. The man moved quickly, his footsteps quiet but purposeful. He stopped at a side door, checking the street outside before he waved them over. "This is your best chance," he said. "You'll be able to slip out the back. It's not much, but it's better than staying here." Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her through the door, his eyes scanning the street outside. It was dark, the only light coming from the dim street lamps, casting long shadows on the pavement. The street was eerily quiet, but Jake knew better than to trust silence. They weren't safe yet. He could hear the distant sound of a car engine, the low rumble growing louder with every passing second. "We need to move," Jake said, his voice urgent. "Stay close to me." They started walking quickly, keeping to the shadows, their footsteps soft against the pavement. Sarah was right behind him, her hand tightly gripping his. She was shaking, but Jake didn't stop to comfort her. He knew the danger wasn't over yet. They needed to get as far away as possible, and that meant staying ahead of whoever was after them. As they moved through the dark streets, Jake's mind raced. He had no idea who was after them, but he could guess. It was someone powerful, someone who had the resources to track them down. The thought made his skin crawl. He wasn't a stranger to danger, but this felt different. Whoever they were up against, they were playing a game that Jake didn't fully understand. And that made him nervous. The sound of tires screeching on the pavement snapped Jake out of his thoughts. He glanced back and saw the headlights of a car rounding the corner. His heart skipped a beat. They'd found them. "Run!" Jake shouted, pulling Sarah with him as they broke into a sprint. They dashed down the street, the sound of the car growing louder behind them. Jake could hear the engine revving, getting closer, and he knew they wouldn't be able to outrun it for long. They needed a plan. Fast. As they turned a corner, Jake spotted an alley up ahead. It was narrow, dark, and it could give them the cover they needed. "This way," Jake shouted, tugging Sarah toward the alley. They made the turn, their feet pounding on the pavement as they ran into the narrow space between the buildings. The alley was filled with trash and old boxes, the smell of rot lingering in the air. But it was their only chance. The sound of the car followed them into the alley, but it couldn't go as fast in the narrow space. Jake glanced behind him to see the headlights just barely visible at the entrance. They were losing ground. For now, they had to keep moving, keep staying ahead of them. They ran deeper into the alley, turning sharp corners, trying to keep the car from finding them. Jake's mind was spinning with options, trying to come up with a way out. And then, he saw it, a ladder leaning against a fire escape. It was their chance. "Up there," Jake shouted, pointing to the ladder. Without hesitation, he pulled Sarah up the ladder, his hands steady despite the fear coursing through him. The car's engine roared behind them, but they were getting away. At least for now. "I'm not looking back," Jake thought, focusing all his energy on the climb as his boots found purchase on the rusty fire escape ladder. His heart was pounding in his chest, his muscles burning from the adrenaline coursing through him. He could hear the faint screech of tires in the alley below, but he kept moving, pulling Sarah up after him. He glanced back once to see her scrambling to follow his lead, her small hands gripping the ladder tightly. Her face was pale, but she was trying. She was staying strong. That's all that mattered right now. They reached the rooftop, and Jake helped Sarah up onto the flat surface. The night air was cold and crisp, but the relief of being out of immediate danger washed over him for a moment. Still, his senses were on high alert. They had to keep moving. They couldn't afford to stop. As Sarah took a moment to catch her breath, Jake scanned the dark streets below. The city was quieter up here, but that didn't mean they were safe. The sedan had to be close. He could feel it in his bones. His grip tightened on the roof's edge as he looked for the next move. "We can't stay up here for long," he said, turning to Sarah. She nodded, her eyes wide but focused. "Where do we go now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake glanced around. The roofs of the nearby buildings were close enough that they could jump, but he didn't want to risk it unless he had to. The sound of a car's engine revving echoed up from the street below. Jake's heart skipped. "They're coming," he muttered, as the headlights from a car appeared at the end of the alley they had just fled from. The sedan. It was getting closer. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice low and urgent. Without waiting for an answer, he grabbed Sarah's arm and led her to the edge of the building. He could see the rooftops of the next set of buildings ahead, and it was their best bet. It was risky, but they had no choice. "You ready?" Jake asked, his voice steady but his mind racing. Sarah didn't answer right away, but she nodded, her grip tightening on his arm. "I'm ready," she said, though Jake could hear the fear in her voice. He gave her a quick glance, then turned to the edge of the building. They needed to jump. "On 3, Jake said. 1, 2. He didn't wait for 3. With one swift motion, he pulled Sarah into his arms and leapt across the gap between the buildings. The wind whipped past them, and for a moment, Jake wasn't sure if they were going to make it. But his feet landed on the edge of the next roof with a jolt, sending a shock through his legs. He stumbled, but caught his balance just in time. He turned to help Sarah. She was shaking, but she was here. They had made it. For now, they were on a new roof, but the danger was still out there, still looming in the darkness below. Jake's pulse raced as he scanned the street below them. The sedan's headlights were still visible, making their way down the road, slowly creeping toward their location. He could see 2 figures moving quickly through the alley, searching for any sign of them. They had to get farther away. They couldn't stay on this roof for long. Without another word, Jake pulled Sarah to her feet and motioned for her to follow him. They made their way across the rooftop, sticking to the shadows, moving as quietly as possible. Jake's mind was racing, trying to think of their next move. The city stretched out before them, dark and silent, but there were places to hide. There had to be. They just needed to get there. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the edge of another building. Jake's eyes darted across the street. He could see a small alleyway between 2 buildings. It looked like their best shot. "There," Jake whispered, pointing to the alley. "We can make it there." Sarah nodded, her face tense but determined. Together, they crouched low and moved toward the edge. Jake peered around the corner, checking the alley for any movement. The street was clear, but the sedan was still nearby. He could hear the engine idling in the distance, just out of view. They had to move fast. Jake motioned for Sarah to stay close, and they sprinted toward the alley. The sound of their footsteps seemed too loud in the silence of the night, but they pushed on. When they reached the alley, Jake quickly turned to Sarah. "Stay low," he whispered, pulling her into the narrow space between the buildings. The alley was quiet, but they couldn't let their guard down yet. "We'll wait here," Jake said. "We can't risk being spotted." Sarah nodded again, her face pale, her breathing shallow. She was scared, but she was holding it together. For now, that was enough. Jake's mind raced. They couldn't stay in this alley forever, but they had a few minutes. He could hear the sound of footsteps approaching from the street, and his pulse quickened. The sedan had parked down the block. They were close, too close. But Jake wasn't going to give up. Not now, not after everything they'd been through. He had to keep them both safe. He couldn't fail her. He wouldn't. "I can hear their footsteps coming closer," Jake thought, his heart pounding in his chest as he crouched low in the alley with Sarah. Every nerve in his body was on edge, and the silence between them seemed to stretch on forever. The distant hum of the sedan's engine was still there, but now, there was something else, a faint scraping sound, the shuffle of boots against concrete. They were closing in. Jake peered around the corner of the building, his eyes scanning the street for any sign of movement. The sedan was still parked a block away, its headlights casting long shadows against the walls of the buildings. Jake didn't know how long they could stay hidden in this alley. His mind raced, looking for a way out. He looked down at Sarah, who was crouched beside him, her small frame barely visible in the dark. Her eyes were wide, her breathing shallow, but she hadn't said a word. She was terrified, but Jake could see the strength in her, the same strength that had helped her survive this long. He couldn't fail her now. A sudden sound from behind them made Jake stiffen. The faintest whisper of footsteps echoed down the alley, growing louder by the second. They were getting closer. He turned his head sharply, his hand moving instinctively to the knife hidden beneath his jacket. His mind raced. There was no way out of this unless they made a move now. Jake gently nudged Sarah, his voice low and urgent. "Stay close," he whispered. She nodded, her eyes locking onto his, trusting him without question. With a quick motion, Jake stood up, pulling her to her feet, and they sprinted down the alley toward the next corner. The alley was narrow, the walls closing in on them as they ran, but the street was coming up fast. Jake's eyes darted back to the corner they had just passed, but no one was there. They were too fast, for now. They reached the corner, and Jake stopped, pressing his back against the wall, listening. The sounds of pursuit had stopped, and for a moment, it seemed like they might have lost them. But Jake didn't dare relax. They were still being hunted, and the danger was far from over. He looked down at Sarah, whose face was pale but determined. "We can't stop here," he said, his voice steady, though his heart was still racing. "We need to find a place to lay low, somewhere they won't think to look." Sarah nodded, her grip tightening on his arm. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Jake scanned the street ahead. The lights were dim, and the area seemed quiet, but he knew they couldn't afford to stay exposed. The warehouse district was just up ahead. It was full of abandoned buildings, dark alleys, and shadows, but it might be their only chance. He looked at Sarah. "We head for the warehouses. Stay close to me, and don't make a sound." With that, he turned and led her down the street, moving quickly but carefully. They passed several darkened storefronts, but the street was mostly deserted. The night air was cool, but the sweat on Jake's skin made him feel overheated. Every sense was on high alert, and he could feel the pressure building with every step they took. They reached the first warehouse, a hulking structure with broken windows and a rusted steel door. Jake glanced around before pulling Sarah into the shadow of the building. "Stay here," he whispered. He crept around the corner to check for any movement, but the street was empty. He motioned for Sarah to follow and led her to the back of the building. The door was locked, but Jake knew this area well. He'd spent years riding these streets, and he knew how to get inside most places. After a few moments of searching, he found an old window, barely hanging on its hinges. He pushed it open quietly and helped Sarah inside. Once she was in, he followed her in, closing the window behind him. The inside of the warehouse was dark and musty, filled with stacks of old crates and discarded machinery. They moved quickly, staying low to the ground, looking for a place to hide. Jake found a corner near a pile of old boxes and crouched down. He motioned for Sarah to sit beside him. They stayed in the dark, barely breathing, listening to the sounds outside. For a few moments, all they could hear was the distant rumble of the city, the faint sound of sirens, and the occasional crackling of a radio. Jake's mind raced. He knew they couldn't stay here long, but they needed a plan. He glanced at Sarah, who was sitting beside him, her eyes wide with fear. She looked up at him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she spoke. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked, her voice small and shaky. Jake looked at her, his heart heavy. He wanted to say yes, to reassure her, but he knew better than to make false promises. "I'll make sure we're okay," he said, his voice firm. "We just have to be patient. We'll find a way out of this." He couldn't let her see the doubt in his eyes. He had to stay strong for her, for both of them. But deep down, he knew they were running out of time. The people after them weren't going to give up easily. Jake's fingers tightened around the handle of his knife. He had faced worse, but this felt different. This was personal, and he wasn't about to let them take Sarah. Not now, not ever. "I've been here before," Jake thought, his eyes scanning the shadows of the dark warehouse. He had learned long ago to trust the quiet moments when everything seemed still, but he wasn't fooled. They weren't safe yet. He could feel the pressure building inside him, the gnawing sense of impending danger that had followed him for years. Sarah sat beside him, her small frame hunched as she stared at the ground. The fear that had once been overwhelming in her eyes had now been replaced with a steely determination, but Jake could tell she was exhausted. She was trying to hold it together, for both of them, but Jake could see the weight of everything pressing on her shoulders. He couldn't let her carry it alone. "Leave," Jake said, his voice low and urgent. Sarah looked at him, her face pale. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jake didn't have a solid plan. He had no idea where to go or how to get out of the city. All he knew was that they couldn't stay in one place for too long. He thought about the old warehouse district, the maze of buildings and alleyways that crisscrossed the area. It wasn't the safest place, but it might give them the cover they needed to make it out of the city unnoticed. "I know a place," Jake said, pulling Sarah to her feet. "Stay close to me, and don't make a sound." They moved quickly through the warehouse, the floor creaking underfoot, the darkness swallowing them as they slipped past old crates and piles of discarded equipment. Jake's senses were heightened, his every movement deliberate and quiet. He could feel Sarah's presence behind him, her small hand gripping his jacket as they crept toward the back door. The night air was cold, biting at Jake's skin as he pulled open the door. He glanced outside, his eyes scanning the street for any sign of movement. The coast was clear, for now. He motioned for Sarah to follow, and they moved out into the shadows of the alley. The air felt thick, heavy with tension. They moved quickly, sticking to the edges of the buildings, their footsteps muffled on the wet pavement. As they rounded a corner, Jake heard the sound of a car approaching in the distance. His heart skipped a beat. The sedan. They were back. "We need to get off the streets," Jake muttered, pulling Sarah toward a narrow side alley that led to a set of old, abandoned apartments. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than being out in the open. He pushed open the door to one of the buildings, the hinges creaking in protest. The interior was dark, the smell of mildew and decay thick in the air. But it was quiet. They could rest here for a moment. Jake locked the door behind them and led Sarah up the stairs, each step creaking beneath their weight. They reached the second floor and slipped into an old, run-down apartment. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. "Stay here," Jake said, his voice low but firm. He needed to check the area. He needed to be sure they were safe. He moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the street below. The sedan was parked at the far end of the block, its headlights off, but Jake could still feel the presence of danger in the air. They hadn't given up. Not yet. He had to be ready. And he would be. For Sarah. He turned back to her, his expression hardening. "We're not safe yet. But we will be. I'm not sure how much longer we can keep running," Jake thought, his eyes scanning the apartment for any sign of danger. The walls felt like they were closing in on him, but he knew they couldn't stay here for long. The sedan was still out there, and the people who were after them weren't going to give up. Sarah was sitting in the corner of the room, her eyes distant, but her hands were clenched tightly in her lap. She was trying to stay strong, trying to hold it together, but Jake could see the toll it was taking on her. She had been through so much, and he couldn't help but feel responsible. He had promised to protect her, and right now, it felt like he was failing. His hand clenched around the edge of the window frame as he peered out into the night. The sedan was still parked at the end of the street, its lights off, the engine silent. But Jake could feel them, could feel the eyes watching, waiting. He wasn't sure how long they had before the people chasing them found their way here, but he couldn't let Sarah down. He had to do something, anything, to get them out of this. He turned to Sarah, his voice steady but urgent. "We need to leave. Now." She looked up at him, her expression blank for a moment, and then she nodded. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small. Jake ran a hand through his hair, trying to think. They couldn't stay here, but the city was crawling with the people after them. He had no idea where they could go, but they had to get out of the city, out of reach. "I have a place," he said, his mind racing. "A friend's house. It's far enough away that they won't find us right." "Away." Sarah nodded again, and Jake could see the flicker of hope in her eyes. It was the first time she had looked at him like that in hours. He wasn't sure how much of it was trust and how much of it was desperation, but he didn't care. They had to move. He grabbed her arm gently and pulled her to her feet. "Stay close," he said, his voice low. "And don't make a sound." They moved quickly through the apartment, Jake glancing out the window once more. The sedan was still there, but it wasn't moving. For a moment, Jake thought they might have been forgotten. But he couldn't risk it. They had to go. He led Sarah down the stairwell, his senses on high alert. Every creak of the floorboards under their feet felt like an alarm. They reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped into the dark hallway. Jake's heart was racing as he pushed open the front door and peeked outside. The street was quiet, too quiet. The sedan was still there, parked like a shadow in the distance. He didn't see anyone else, but he wasn't about to take any chances. "Stay close to me," he whispered, pulling Sarah with him as they slipped out the door and into the night. They moved quickly down the street, sticking to the shadows, their footsteps soft against the pavement. Jake's mind raced as he calculated the best way to get them to safety. He knew they couldn't take the main roads. They'd be spotted. They had to find another way, a way that would take them off the radar. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes darting from side to side. The sedan was still parked where it had been, but Jake knew better than to think they were safe. They were just waiting, waiting for them to make a mistake. He pulled Sarah into another alley, moving quickly but quietly. The alley was narrow, littered with trash and broken bottles, but it offered cover. For now, it was enough. They reached a dead end at the end of the alley, and Jake paused, listening for any sounds. He could hear the distant rumble of a car engine, but it wasn't the sedan. Not yet. Jake pulled out his phone and dialed a number, his finger tapping nervously on the screen. The phone rang twice before. Someone picked up. "Jake?" The voice on the other end said, sounding surprised. "What's going on?" "I need your help," Jake said, his voice tight. "I'm coming to you. Just stay put, and don't tell anyone I'm coming." There was a brief pause on the other end before the voice responded. "You got it. I'll be waiting. Be careful." Jake ended the call and turned to Sarah. "We've got one more stop to make," he said, his voice low. "Then we'll be safe." He didn't know how safe they would be. He didn't know how long they could keep running. But he couldn't stop now. Not when Sarah was counting on him. He pulled Sarah close again, his hand wrapped tightly around hers as they made their way toward the next street. Every step felt like they were moving through a maze, the city around them pressing in like a vice. They were almost there. Almost safe. But as they turned the corner, Jake's heart skipped a beat. The sedan. It was right in front of them. The headlights flickered on, illuminating the street as it slowly started to move toward them. Jake's pulse quickened. There was no time. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her toward the nearest building. They couldn't stop now. They had to move faster. The sedan was closing in. The chase was far from over. I can hear the engine roar behind us, and for the first time tonight, my heart sinks. The sedan's headlights flood the street as it speeds towards us, casting long shadows on the cracked sidewalk. There's no more running. I look down at Sarah, who's breathing heavily beside me. Her eyes are wide with panic, but she's holding on. She's holding on to me like I promised I'd keep her safe. I grip her hand tighter, not sure if she feels the same weight of what's about to happen. "Jake," she whispers, her voice barely audible. "What do we do now?" I take a deep breath, scanning the streets. There's nowhere to hide. Nowhere to run. The sedan is too close. It's too damn close. My mind races. I look at the alley to my left, a narrow passage that leads between two tall buildings. It's a dead end, but maybe I can get them to stop long enough for us to make a move. We don't have time to think. We make our stand here, I say, trying to sound confident, though I know the odds aren't in our favor. The sound of the sedan's engine is deafening now. I glance at Sarah, her grip tight around my hand, her face pale but determined. "Stay behind me. Don't let go." I can feel the tension building. I can hear the tires screech as the sedan makes the turn, coming up fast on the narrow street. "We're going to be fine," I say, though my voice feels like it's shaking. But it's too late for that now. I reach into my jacket, fingers brushing the handle of my knife. It's all I've got left. It's not much, but maybe it'll be enough to buy us a chance. The sedan screeches to a halt just a few feet away from us. The door opens, and two men step out. They're both wearing dark jackets, their faces shadowed, but I can see the glint of something in their hands, guns. I instinctively step in front of Sarah, my back to her, ready to protect her with everything I've got. The men don't say anything at first. They just stand there, sizing me up, the cold night air thick with the tension. "You're making a mistake," one of the men finally says, his voice low and dangerous. "Get out of the way." He moves closer, the gun in his hand aimed directly at me. I don't flinch. I can feel Sarah's breath on my back, but I can't turn around to look at her. Not yet. The words don't come out. Instead, I reach for the knife at my side and pull it free from its sheath, holding it in front of me as a threat. I don't want to use it. I never wanted it to come to this, but it's all I've got. The man doesn't flinch either. He just stares at me like I'm an obstacle, a minor inconvenience in his path. I can feel the tension building, my heart racing faster with each second. But then, just as I'm about to make my move, I hear a voice behind me. "Hold it right there." A shout, followed by the sound of a gunshot. My blood runs cold. For a moment, everything goes still. The men freeze, their attention snapping toward the sound of the shot. I don't know where it came from, but I don't waste time thinking about it. I grab Sarah's hand and pull her with me toward the alley, running as fast as I can. We don't stop to look back. We don't have time. The sound of running feet echoes behind us. The men are following us, but they've lost ground for a moment. We make it to the alley. and I hear Sarah's breath, shallow and quick, in my ear. I glance around, but it's a dead end. The alley narrows even more, and I feel a rush of panic flood my chest. There's nowhere left to run. I turn to Sarah. We're going to have to fight our way out, I say, though my voice is tight. I don't know how we're going to get out of this, but I'll be damned if I let them take her. I look down at Sarah, who's shaking now, but there's a fire in her eyes. She's terrified, but she's not backing down. I know we're out of options, and maybe, just maybe, this will be the moment we take control. I can hear the men getting closer. I can hear their footsteps echoing in the alley, their voices low, but I don't know what they're planning. The barrel of the gun flashes in the dim light as one of them steps closer. I take a deep breath and hold my ground. Stay close, Sarah, I say, my voice calm despite the chaos in my head. She nods, clutching the back of my jacket. I tighten my grip on the knife, preparing for whatever comes next. And then, just as the first man steps into the alley, I hear another voice, louder, more commanding. Freeze. It's a new voice, but this one isn't coming from behind us. It's coming from the other end of the alley. The alley holds his gun steady, his eyes locked on the two men who were moments away from trapping us. The tension in the air thickens, like a knot tightening around my chest. For a second, everything feels suspended in time. The sound of the men's footsteps halting, the distant hum of the city, even Sarah's shallow breath against my back. The man with the gun doesn't say a word, just stares at the two men with a fierce determination. The men look at him, then back at me, and I can see the calculation in their eyes. They're deciding whether to fight or flee. The second man reaches for his own gun, but before he can even raise it, the first man's voice cuts through the silence like a knife. Drop your weapons, he commands, his voice low and controlled. The men hesitate, clearly weighing their options. They're outnumbered, and they know it. The one with the gun slowly lowers it to the ground, the metal scraping against the pavement as he lets go. His partner follows suit, his hands raised in defeat. It's over. For now. I'm not sure how long I've been holding my breath, but when I finally let it out, it's shaky, the tension leaving my body all at once. I turn to Sarah, who's still clutching my jacket, her face pale with fear. She looks up at me, and for the first time in what feels like forever, I see a flicker of hope in her eyes. We're still alive. The man with the gun steps forward, lowering it and holstering it quickly. He's older than I expected, maybe in his mid-40s, his face weathered but strong, like someone who's been through the fire and come out the other side. His eyes are sharp, scanning the two men who are now kneeling on the ground, hands on their heads. Get up, the man says to them, his tone cold. The two men do as they're told, their movements slow and cautious. The man gives me a quick glance, his expression unreadable. You're lucky, he says, his eyes narrowing as he studies me. I wasn't sure you'd make it out of this. You're in deeper than you think. The words hit me harder than I expect. Who are you? I ask, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm someone who doesn't like people like them, he says, with a nod toward the two men, who are now standing, still tense and wary. But I'm not in the business of saving everyone. So what's your story? I'm not sure how to respond. I want to tell him everything, about the chase, about the people after us, about the promise I made to protect Sarah. But I don't know if I can trust him yet. We don't have time for stories, I say, keeping my voice low but firm. They're still coming for us. They'll be back, and they won't stop until they find us. The man nods, understanding the urgency. Then let's not waste time, he says. You're right. We need to move. Without waiting for another word, he turns and heads toward the street. I grab Sarah's hand, pulling her along as we follow him. The two men watch us, but there's no fight left in them. They know they're beaten. As we step into the street, the man leads us down a series of back alleys, his pace quick but steady. I'm trying to keep up, my heart still pounding, but my mind is already racing ahead, trying to figure out what's next. Where do we go now? How do we get out of this? We reach a rundown building, its windows boarded up, the front door barely hanging on its hinges. The man pushes it open, and we step inside. The interior is dark, the air stale, and the smell of old wood and dust fills my nostrils. The man looks back at me, his eyes cold. Stay here, he says. I'll check the perimeter. Don't make a sound. I nod, and he moves toward the back of the building. I can hear him walking around the space, the creak of the floorboards echoing in the quiet. Sarah and I are left standing in the middle of the room, the silence pressing in on us. I look around, but there's nothing here. Just old crates and piles of debris. It feels like a dead end, and I'm not sure how much longer we can stay hidden. After a few minutes, the man returns, his face serious. "We need to move," he says. "There's no time to waste." He looks at the two men who had been following us. "You too. You're coming with us. I'll explain on the way." The men nod, but their faces are still tense. They know they've lost, and they know that they owe their survival to the man who just saved our lives. As we move toward the back door, my mind is still reeling. I don't know who this man is or why he's helping us, but right now, he's the only chance we've got. The night is far from over, and I know the real battle is still ahead of us. But for the first time in hours, I'm starting to feel like we might just make it out of this. With Sarah beside me, and this stranger who seems to have his own agenda, maybe, just maybe, we can survive. But there's a long road ahead, and I'm not sure where it will lead. All I know is that we're not out of the woods yet. I don't know how long we've been moving, but it feels like hours. The man who helped us hasn't said much since we left the rundown building. He leads us through a maze of alleyways, his footsteps steady but silent, while Sarah and I stay close behind, trying to keep up. The air is thick with tension, and the only sounds are the distant hum of the city and the occasional creak of a door or the rattle of loose debris. Sarah's hand is still in mine, her grip tight and trembling. I can feel her anxiety, but I don't have the answers she needs. I wish I could tell her everything would be fine. I wish I could promise that we'd be safe. But I can't. The truth is, we're not safe. Not yet. And I don't know if we ever will be. I glance over at the man in front of us. He's moving with purpose, not looking back, but every so often, I catch the glint of his eyes, sharp and focused. He's been through this before. Whatever this is, whatever danger we're facing, he knows it. How much farther? I ask, my voice hoarse from the stress. He doesn't answer right away, just keeps moving, his boots making little sound as they hit the pavement. But then he stops abruptly, turning to face us. "It's just up ahead," he says quietly. "Stay close, and don't make a sound." I nod, but the pit in my stomach tightens. I don't trust anyone. Not really. But right now he's our only option. We follow him as he leads us toward an old garage at the end of the alley. It looks abandoned, with a rusted door and peeling paint, but something about it feels secure. The man stops in front of it and pulls a key out of his pocket, unlocking the door with a quick twist. "In," he says, motioning for us to go inside. I hesitate for a moment, looking down at Sarah, who's still holding onto my jacket like it's the only thing keeping her from falling apart. I squeeze her hand reassuringly, then step into the dimly lit garage. It's dark, the only light coming from a single bulb hanging above us. Inside, the space is empty except for a few old cars, tools scattered around, and a faint smell of motor oil and rust. The man closes the door behind us, locking it securely. "We're safe for now," he says, turning to face us. "But we're not out of danger yet." I take a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I don't know what kind of place this is, or who this man really is, but I do know one thing. We need a plan. The man looks at me, studying my face for a moment before speaking again. "You too," he says, "you're in deep. Whoever's chasing you, they're not going to give up. Not until they get what they want. And that's not just you. That's your lives. So, you need to make a choice." I don't say anything at first. His words hit harder than I expect. We've been running for so long, and I can't shake the feeling that we've been pawns in some bigger game this whole time. "What kind of choice?" I ask, my voice low. The man sighs, as if this is something he's had to explain many times before. "You can keep running, but they'll find you. It's just a matter of time. Or, you can take the fight to them." I don't know what to say. I'm tired. Tired of running. Tired of the constant fear. But can we really fight back? Can we take on whoever is after us? I look down at Sarah, and I see the same uncertainty in her eyes. "What do you mean, take the fight to them?" I finally ask. The man steps forward, his expression hard. "There's a place," he says, "a location where they're operating out of. You'll find everything you need to know about who they are, what they want, and how to stop them. But it's not going to be easy. And it's not going to be quick." I take a deep breath, trying to process his words. A part of me just wants to give up, to find somewhere to hide and hope this all blows over. But I know that's not an option. Not anymore. I turn to Sarah, who's watching me, her eyes full of questions. What do you think? I ask her quietly. She doesn't hesitate. We don't have a choice, she says, her voice barely above a whisper. We have to fight. I nod slowly, feeling the weight of her words sink in. She's right. We don't have a choice. We can't run forever. I turn back to the man, my resolve hardening. Where do we start? The man gives a small nod, a faint glimmer of approval in his eyes. Follow me, he says. He moves toward the back of the garage, opening a small door that leads down into a basement. The stairs creak under our weight as we follow him down into the darkness. The air is cooler here, and the smell of dust and old wood fills my nose. We're not out of danger yet, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like we have a chance. And that's all I can ask for. The man stops at a workbench covered in papers, maps, and files. He picks up a folder and hands it to me. This is what you need, he says. It'll tell you everything you need to know about them. I open the folder, scanning the contents. Names, locations, photos. Everything I need to start putting the pieces together. I look back at Sarah, and she meets my gaze with a determined look in her eyes. We're in this together. And no matter what happens next, we're going to fight. We have to. The folder in my hands feels heavier than I expected. Every piece of paper inside it seems to weigh 1,000 pounds. The names, the addresses, the photographs, all of it coming together in a twisted, complicated web. As I flip through the pages, I start to get a sense of the vastness of the operation we're up against. These people, the ones chasing us, they're not just a group of criminals. They're organized. They have power. They've been operating in the shadows for a long time. I glance over at Sarah, who's standing beside me, her eyes scanning the same files. Her face is pale, but there's a fire in her eyes that wasn't there before. She's ready. For the first time since this nightmare started, I see the same determination in her that I feel. We're not running anymore. We're fighting. The man who's been helping us stays quiet, watching us carefully as we digest the information. I can feel the weight of his gaze, as if he's measuring how much we're willing to risk. The silence stretches between us, heavy and thick with unspoken words. Finally, I look up, meeting his eyes. What's the next move? I ask, my voice steady, despite the pounding in my chest. He doesn't hesitate. You're going to need backup. I've made some calls, but you're going to have to go in fast. Get in, get the intel, and get out. You won't have long. I nod, absorbing the gravity of his words. He's right. We don't have time to waste. The longer we stay, the more chance they'll find us. It's a dangerous game we're playing, but there's no other choice. I turn back to Sarah, and for a moment, we just look at each other. She's scared, I can see it in her eyes, but there's something else there too, a fierce determination. She trusts me, and that's all I need. Together, we can make it. Are you ready? I ask her, my voice low. She takes a deep breath, then nods. Yeah, she says, her voice firm. Let's do this. The man gives a sharp nod, turning to lead us out of the garage. As we step into the alley, the air is cold, but there's a fire in my chest that keeps me moving. The city stretches out before us, dark and quiet, like it's holding its breath. We move swiftly, sticking to the shadows as we head toward the location marked on the map, the heart of the operation. I can feel the tension mounting, the weight of everything that's on the line. We don't have much time. The closer we get, the more I can feel it, the eyes watching us, the sense of being hunted. But we have to keep going. We have to finish this. The streets are empty, and the only sound is the soft thud of our boots against the pavement. We reach the building, a rundown office complex that blends in with the rest of the city's forgotten structures. There's nothing particularly suspicious about it, but I know better. This is where they're hiding in plain sight. I stop just short of the entrance, motioning for Sarah to stay close. My hand moves instinctively to the gun tucked in the waistband of my jeans, and I take a deep breath. Stay quiet, I whisper to her. She nods, her eyes sharp with focus. I can feel the adrenaline surging through me as I step forward, my eyes scanning the area. The door is unlocked, and we slip inside, moving like ghosts in the night. The building is eerily quiet. The low hum of machinery and the faint sound of voices echo through the halls. I lead the way, keeping to the shadows, my heart pounding in my chest. We don't know how much longer we have before they notice we're here, but I'm not about to back down now. Not when we're this close. We find the staircase that leads down into the basement. The place where everything happens. It's dark, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete and old pipes. As we descend into the darkness, I can feel the weight of the situation settling in. This is it. There's no turning back. We reach the bottom, and I stop to listen. The sound of footsteps, distant voices. Someone's down here. I gesture for Sarah to stay behind me, and we move toward the source of the noise. We round the corner, and I freeze. There they are, two men, standing by a set of locked doors, talking quietly. One of them turns, and for a second, I think they see us. But they don't. They don't even look up. This is our chance. I signal for Sarah to move, and we slip past them, unnoticed. The door is right in front of us now, the one we need to get through. I reach for the handle, and the cold metal sends a shiver down my spine. I take a deep breath and push. The door creaks open, and we step inside. What we find on the other side is more than I expected. Files, documents, computers, evidence of everything they've been doing. I move quickly, grabbing as much as I can. This is what we came for. This is the proof we need to end this. I look at Sarah, her face lit up by the glow of the screen in front of her. She's already scanning the documents, her hands moving quickly as she gathers everything. She looks up at me, and for the first time in what feels like forever, I see the relief in her eyes. We've got what we came for. But it's not over. I can feel it. They know we're here. It's only a matter of time before they come for us. I grab the files, and we head for the exit. We're not safe yet, but we will be soon. In this gripping tale of survival and resilience, we dive deep into the world of Hell Angel's stories filled with danger, betrayal, and unexpected allies. As the protagonist and his companion are relentlessly pursued by shadowy forces, their journey unfolds in a way that only Hell Angel's stories can. They are faced with difficult choices and harrowing moments, constantly on the run, as they uncover a hidden web of conspiracy. The streets are their battleground, and every corner turned brings them closer to uncovering the truth about their pursuers and what they truly want. In a world where trust is scarce, every decision becomes a fight for survival, and the stakes are higher than ever. With each passing moment, the tension builds, as our protagonists are forced to make life-changing decisions. They find themselves facing the harsh realities of their situation, learning to rely on one another to stay one step ahead of those who seek to capture them. This thrilling narrative is an intense addition to the genre of Hell Angel stories, where loyalty, danger, and determination intertwine. As they race against time, the depth of their connection becomes their greatest strength. But danger is never far behind, and even in moments of apparent safety, the threat of discovery looms large. This is a powerful chapter in the ongoing saga of Hell Angel stories, with no guarantees of what will come next, but with every intention to continue the fight until the truth is revealed. Get ready for a wild ride, as you immerse yourself in the raw emotion and adrenaline of Hell Angel stories ***, where survival means constantly staying one step ahead and never trusting anyone completely.